Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz, coming to you live on a Monday morning. What is going on? I am Matt O'Leary, joined as always by my co-host Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you today?
Doing great. Once again, we are creeping closer to the NFL draft, and I'm getting really excited. We're hearing a lot of rumors coming out of the league meeting taking place in Orlando. A lot of fun stuff and takeaways from that. Sounds like some trades might happen in this draft. A lot of exciting stuff going on leading up to the draft.
Absolutely. Free agency kind of a little bit in the rear view. We're entering, what is it, week 3, essentially, of the free agency period. Most of the bigger names signed. So 100% the transition goes to the NFL draft. A ton of rumors coming out for both of these teams this week. And Robert Saleh spoke earlier today at the NFL owners meeting. So some quotes there from him that we want to get into. And let's start first with that Robert Saleh speaking. And to me, my biggest takeaway from that is Robert Saleh kind of denies the need to make the playoffs and then follows it up with, yeah, I guess you could say we have to win this year. So for full context, they flat out asked, is it a failure if you guys don't make the playoffs in 2024? He says no, and then kind of immediately follows it back with saying that right now, if we don't win, it's, we suck, and you suck until you win, is paraphrasing here, but he then walks it back. So my question is, which is it? Do you have a playoff mandate or not? But I think I would hope at least that he's self-aware enough that he realizes that this Jets team has to be a playoff team in 2024 if he wants to be coaching again next year.
Yeah, you would hope he's able to realize that. And I just think that for the Jets, I mean, it couldn't be more obvious that this is a win-now team. You made the trade for Aaron Rodgers. If you bring him over here and you go through 2 seasons with barely any winning and you don't make the playoffs, then the whole thing is just one big waste. So you'd have to imagine that Robert Saleh has some idea of that. And I thought another interesting quote that he had, Matt, that I want to kind of hear your thoughts on was, he mentioned something about how they looked into adding more talent to the offensive coaching staff, but then decided that they were good with what they had. I have to imagine most Jets fans don't feel like they are good with what they have on the offensive coaching staff.
No, definitely not. For me, I think that's a little bit of a red flag. But I think what ended up happening there was that he maybe was looking to add a bigger name guy. Like, supposedly they were in on Arthur Smith because the Jets just love to take any former Tennessee Titan offensive coach and just add them to their staff. They did it with Tony Dews. They have Keith Carter. They have Todd Downing. Like, they have a lot of former Tennessee Titan offensive coaches on this staff. But I think once that went down the drain, and probably because nobody wanted to come in and hitch their wagon to Todd Downing, Keith Carter, and Nathaniel Hackett, they said, all right, well, our plan is going to be that Aaron Rodgers comes in and fixes it, which I think is part of the frustration for me, is that they are very much so relying on Aaron Rodgers to be that big fix. And I'm not saying that he can't be. Like, obviously he is talented enough to where he can come in and help mitigate, some of the problems on the offensive side of the football. But they're basically saying we need you to be the reason why this offense has success, because as we saw last year, granted, quarterback play was really bad, but I don't think Keith Carter, Todd Downing, or Nathaniel Hackett are elevating anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I thought it was a little bit of a disaster last year on that offensive staff, and it seems like it's Aaron Rodgers has a great season or it's bust for the Jets. And I think that could probably open up a larger discussion about how confident should we be in Aaron Rodgers coming off of the torn Achilles. I think that there's not enough conversation about that personally. And we'll of course direct criticism at Robert Saleh and the staff, but I think that there is a lot to be said about how the Jets right now are just putting all of their eggs in this Aaron Rodgers basket is how it feels to me. And I know that they went ahead and signed Tyrod Taylor, which we've praised that move before, give them some stability in the backup quarterback spot. But I just wonder how good Aaron Rodgers is going to be coming off of that injury with this offensive coaching staff. I definitely have my questions about this whole situation.
Yeah, totally fair. We'll get into that in a second. While you were talking, I wanted to pull it up. The quote. Hang on, I don't know if you can hear it.
When you lose, you're a loser. I suck. Joe D sucks. We all suck. So it goes with the territory.
When you lose, you're a loser. I suck. We suck. We all we all suck. It's funny, but you're not wrong to bring up the Aaron Rodgers discussion, because I think it's a fair one to have, right, with this guy missing an entire season last year at his age. What's he going to look like coming off the Achilles? There obviously is a little bit of not a little bit, a big question mark, and that's kind of the Jets offense as a whole with most of their additions. Tyron Smith is a question mark because of his injury history. Morgan Moses played through a torn pec last year, which is just wild, but there's a question mark there. Same thing with Mike Williams, and they're banking on a lot of these things to hit. So it feels very boom or bust, and there is bust potential. I think even if Aaron Rodgers isn't his normal self, which I think we could all agree his normal self is an elite level quarterback in this league, I think if he's a top half of the league quarterback for this team, that should be enough to get them over the hump and into the playoffs, just because of how good this defense is on paper. They have a good special teams unit, and it really felt to me, at least last year, that they're really hamstrung by the quarterback position.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And I'll say I think that Tyrod Taylor could be good enough to win some starts and maybe even have this team being a fringe playoff team if it comes down to it, if Rodgers were to get injured again. But I think that this roster is so stacked across the board, as we've kind of been mentioning on the show recently, and that really should elevate the expectations for Robert Saleh, and it should be what makes this team playoff or bust. And so I think it's interesting that he doesn't feel like the playoffs are completely necessary this year. But I think optically to everybody else from the outside looking in, that has to be the case. This team needs to make the playoffs. This roster is too good. And then even just looking at it from a long-term team building standpoint, you've got some good contracts here that are going to start expiring soon as these younger players continue to age and get through their rookie deals and everything like that. So I think that making the postseason is absolute necessity.
Absolutely. And just going back into, again, the comments, Connor Hughes, who covers both the Jets and the Giants, tweeted out just the sequence of tweets is very funny. So starting here at the bottom, Jets head coach Robert Saleh asked if the season is one where anything short of a playoffs is a failure. I'll never say that. And then follows the next two up. Jets head coach Saleh asked if he agrees the premise that a coach in his fourth season has to make the playoffs. I guess you could say that. And then winning offseason doesn't matter. You have to win football games. So eventually he gets there, right? Like it just took him a few. Eventually we get to the finish line there. But the reality is, like, we could like what Joe Douglas has done this offseason and putting the Jets in a position to succeed. We could like what Robert Saleh has done on the defense. Still some questions about whether, if he can manage a game as a head coach. But Saleh's in his fourth season. Joe Douglas is in his sixth season now as the Jets general manager. For both, in my opinion, not just one or the other, but for both these guys, it's win or go home now at this point. And I'm not saying it's Super Bowl or bust, right? Like if you don't win the Super Bowl, then you're blowing it up. But I think there has to be a level of expectation for this team to make the playoffs in a weakened AFC East. Like the Patriots aren't expected to be good. Obviously, Buffalo and Miami playoff teams last year, but both them kind of have taken a little bit of a hit in free agency, losing some key pieces. So I think, a playoff spot is absolutely up for grabs. And I would classify it as a massive failure if they miss the playoffs. I'm sure you would as well.
Yeah, I absolutely would. And I'll say, though, of all the quotes from Robert Saleh that I do like, winning the offseason means nothing kind of quote. I like that one. I think that's important because, in my opinion, in the past, the Jets have definitely done that before, won the offseason. Like, traded for Aaron Rodgers was like, okay, they won the offseason. This is going to be a playoff team now. But then they didn't take the other necessary steps to put this team in a position with a backup quarterback situation and make it to the playoffs anyway. So I think that what I would take away from that quote from Saleh is maybe there was a lesson learned here that yeah, we could do a lot of great things in this offseason and we can put ourselves on paper to make the playoffs, but now we have to actually plan for worst case scenarios and have depth on this roster and, make sure that we deliver on our promises, which I think is definitely an interesting takeaway to have from Saleh's quotes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the point you bring up too with winning the offseason. And last year they made this big splash for Aaron Rodgers. Then it was kind of like that was it. It was like, okay, like we're good to go, which obviously was not the case. But what I like this year is while maybe there hasn't been that huge mega splash, I guess you could argue Tyron Smith and Mike Williams maybe could be looked at as a bigger splashes. But I feel like they've really done a lot to revamp the offensive line. They add a weapon in Mike Williams and kind of just trying to remain status quo as much as possible. Especially, I mean, we talked about in the last 2 episodes, Jadeveon Clowney, his visit with the Jets went well. It feels like there were some rumblings late last night about Jadeveon potentially signing a deal with the Jets. So, we'll look at that. But I think to Douglas's credit, that he's put this team in a spot where there's no room left for well, if this didn't break right for us, injuries, this or that, any excuses for why things don't fail. There is no more excuses left on the table. So again, I'm glad that eventually Robert Saleh got around to saying it's time to win, and winning the offseason's nice, but it's time to win games. And that's kind of just my last takeaway on it is just that's 100% the case. Like that, it is now time to win. And if you don't, well, they're not going to be here in 2025.
Yeah, that's completely right. And I think this team has done plenty on paper in the offseason, winning the offseason. This was a good offseason for the Jets. They are in position, but it really is just about this coaching staff and this personnel unit putting it together on the field and actually stringing together those wins and making the playoffs. And I think that it's been a long time coming for the Jets. Long playoff drought. It really should end this year, but it's really going to be up to the coaching staff at the end of the day to deliver.
Absolutely. Let's get into a Giants story here, as supposedly the Giants are a little bit nervous with Daniel Jones's injury history, which is fair looking at his career so far. Injuries, unfortunately, have been a big part of the Daniel Jones story. What was your takeaway on that, and what does that mean for the Giants going forward?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that when Jordan Rannon of ESPN wrote this article, he was trying to get to the bottom of the Giants in the search for a quarterback because so many different rumblings about who they like in the draft and what direction they want to go with the number 6 pick. Maybe they want to trade up, trade down. There's a lot of discussion right now and speculation about the Giants draft plans, but he was trying to get to the bottom of why are they even considering quarterback after spending all that money on Daniel Jones last season, and essentially wrote in the article that their evaluation of the player has not changed. They still believe in Daniel Jones as a player. However, they now don't feel comfortable building around him because of his injury history, which is pretty extensive. I mean, there might be some Jets fans listening in that don't know. He had the neck surgery in 2021, and it's kind of one of those situations where it's shrouded in mystery. We don't know exactly the length of the neck surgery and like how important it was or how damning it could be for his future. But the assumption is if he were to have another neck surgery at some point, it might be a career-ending injury. So any other injury to the neck is the real concern from Giants fans. And then you compound that with this torn ACL, and you take a look at Jones's history on the field, a lot of rushing. That's really where he's found a lot of his production, that 2022 season where the Giants went to the postseason. I mean, Daniel Jones's legs were a huge part of their offense. So now with this torn ACL, is he still going to be mobile? Is that it's still going to be an element of his game? We just don't know what this is going to look like now with Daniel Jones. And considering what we've seen when Daniel Jones is at his best, it's not exactly the highest ceiling in the world anyway. So this injury history, to me, it is extensive enough to say, hey, even if we believe in him as a player and still have our evaluation of him solid, it's too scary to have a guy with this kind of injury history and trying to build around him, knowing that at any moment he could have another injury that alters his career and probably could be career ending if it's to the neck injury.
No, exactly. And I think that kind of then speaks to what the Giants' plan is. Like they could have all the faith in Daniel Jones, the player, when he's actually on the field. But to me, as you said, like you can't build around that guy. So my takeaway is that this is probably the last, not probably, definitely, I think anyway, Daniel Jones's last season on the New York Giants. I think they will do everything they can to get out of that contract after this season. How it's structured, he's going to be on the team this year in 2024. But does that mean that they're drafting a quarterback this year? Are they going to wait and kick the can down the line and just move on? And then, hit the reset button in 2025 at that point? Like, what's the next steps here for the Giants then after coming to this realization that you can't build around him?
I think it has to be to find the quarterback this offseason, but that's so much easier said than done. I mean, we're hearing all these discussions about that number 4 pick, the Arizona Cardinals trying to move out. Now the Patriots sound like they're open to trading down. Still said getting a quarterback is a priority, but they're open to trading down. So maybe the Giants are in a position where if they want a quarterback and they're going 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to have to move up at least 2 or 3 spots in this draft. And then you're talking about sacrificing probably our second round pick. And now we're not handling the wide receiver position, which I know we're going to discuss later in this episode. So I don't know what the plan is. The Giants have themselves in a really tricky situation picking number 6 overall. I thought that having those 2 second round picks would have been great. They traded one away for Brian Burns, which I'm still hesitant of. And I've said, I like the trade, but I'm not going to grade it until after the draft because I do need to see what the Giants do at quarterback and whether or not that trade impacted their ability to find one. So the plan has to be to get a quarterback. And then in terms of Daniel Jones, you can cut him next season. However, if he doesn't pass his physical in March 2025, that salary in 2026 becomes fully guaranteed. Or 2025 rather, becomes fully guaranteed. So we're going to have a situation most likely where Daniel Jones probably gets benched midway through the year, even if he's healthy, even if the Giants are winning, a Russell Wilson situation, essentially, because of that injury guarantee. So that's another reason why the Giants can't continue to build around Daniel Jones, because if his contract becomes fully guaranteed, you can't build a roster with that thing anyways. So the Giants really don't have a choice but to try to move on from Daniel Jones as soon as possible and find themselves a quarterback that they could get on the field and win games next year, which is why even if it's not a first-round quarterback, taking a quarterback in round 2 is a possibility now for the Giants because they do need to have somebody ready and able to play immediately so that if Daniel Jones, if they want to get him off the field in 2025, they could bench him in 2024 to avoid that injury guarantee. So that's a really big point here that, maybe not a lot of fans know about, but that injury guarantee is probably the reason that the Giants are looking to move on from Daniel Jones in the first place.
Absolutely. And I just pulled up his contract that we could take a look at here. $47 million cap hit this season. As you see, $36 million guaranteed salaries in 25 and 26. There's none, but they can get out of the deal and save, $19 million against the cap in 25. And then in 2026, save $47.5 million. I don't think they get to a point where he's, on the cap and playing in 2026 at $58.6 million. But moral of the story, that's a great point to bring up with the injury thing, because we saw just last year with Russell. I feel like the last couple of years, we've seen examples of quarterbacks getting pulled for, protecting the asset, whether it was, Derek Carr 2 years ago, Russell Wilson this past year. It's something that's becoming a little bit more common. And even you're right. Like, even if Daniel Jones starts the season for the Giants, I don't see how he's starting all 17 games, playing all the way through, and that then leads to what's the next step. I don't think they want to turn it over to Drew Lock and be like, all right, we're just going to kick the can down the road with Drew Lock the rest of the year, or Tommy DeVito. But if they stick at 6, seems like it would be hard to find that quarterback. But I guess not that it's your preference, but are you comfortable with taking a quarterback in the second round as the swing?
Not really. I don't like that tier of quarterbacks. I mean, if you're not getting one of these top 4 guys, I'm not crazy about a Bo Nix. And for the Giants, who have all this concern about Daniel Jones's injury history, Michael Penix Jr. probably shouldn't even be on their draft board. I mean, You're talking injury histories. If that's what you're concerned with Daniel Jones, you can't try and invest your franchise quarterback position into, Michael Penix Jr. So I don't really like that second tier. And then you get into the Spencer Rattlers of the world, who I think is an absolute project and maybe a 3rd round pick, but I'm not sure that I would go that route if I were the Giants either. I think that it's really a 1st round quarterback or bust. And then you're probably just going to hope and pray that Daniel Jones doesn't get hurt and then benching him midway through the season to avoid that injury guarantee. But I don't know how the Giants even let him on the field in 2024 with that injury guarantee. I don't think that they should even let him see the football field. And if he's able to pass a physical as soon as he is, you should just tell him, hey, that's great for you. You're going to be a backup this year. Like, we can't risk you getting injured once again. And so I think that's really where this situation is headed. It's going to be probably pretty ugly, and there's going to be a lot of discourse between Giants fans, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of controversy surrounding that decision, but it feels almost inevitable that the Giants will have to bench Daniel Jones sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to follow. And I agree with you. I don't think you can put him on the field. And maybe you think maybe that's why they add a guy like Drew Lock, so that if, like, let's say you get a rookie quarterback in here, that it's the rookie and Drew Lock, and then like Daniel Jones is like the inactive third quarterback in a way.
Essentially, I think that's the way that they would like it to be. But again, only if they could find the right quarterback. And now they're sitting in a situation at 6 where if quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know how you can kind of be upset with having one of those top wide receivers just fall into your lap. You got to be pretty thrilled about that. But at the same time, it doesn't solve your biggest problems, which is why, when Giants fans have the debate of wide receiver or quarterback in the first round, looking at this Daniel Jones contract and the injury guarantee, everything combined, they have to get another quarterback on this roster who's good and developmental and has the ability to be the franchise quarterback. And so if I were the Giants and if I were Joe Schoen right now, that future first-round pick, that 2025 first-round pick, that is up for grabs. That's what I'm using to move up and try and get a quarterback, because if Daniel Jones takes a field this year, gets hurt, there are so many ways that this could go wrong for Joe Schoen, where he's not going to have that job next year anyway. So you might as well use your future draft capital, move up, get a quarterback, and probably save your job in doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeffrey chimes in the chat. He says, sounds like Dable will be a lame duck coach next season. Do you agree with that thought process, that this could be a lame duck year for Dable?
My feelings on Brian Dable have changed quite a bit since this time last year. Of course, this time last year, I felt very confident and excited about the future and the direction of the Giants. However, this past season was difficult, and it was damning in some ways for Brian Dable and his coaching style. It's been very rah-rah in the past. It's been very, aggressive. But the way that he lost his temper throughout the season, and then we heard all of those stories about how he mistreated Wink Martindale and Mike Kafka, and how they basically gave Mike Kafka that assistant head coach title just to kind of silence him in a way. The whole situation is just looking very strange surrounding Brian Dable. So I could totally see a season here where, the Giants don't pick up enough wins and they decide to just reset the culture and move on from Brian Dable. And for what it's worth, I know that there are players in that locker room that maybe don't like Brian Dable's coaching style and have been trying to move out of the locker room. So it's kind of interesting to see how quickly things can change with one head coach from year to year. But I am having a growing level of concern about Brian Dable entering this season.
Can I share my theory on the Giants' future at the head coaching position with you? I don't know if you're going to go for it, but
I think I already know what you're going to say.
Yeah, I think Bill Belichick is going to be coaching the Giants in 2025.
Yeah. And listen, I've thought about that before, and it's possible because there's obviously that mutual respect and love and admiration that Belichick has for Mara, Mara has for Belichick. It seems like it's an inevitability that one day Belichick will be back with the New York Giants organization in some capacity. And of course, if Brian Dable does get fired this year, I think there's a really strong likelihood that they pivot, try to bring Bill Belichick home. But I don't think that I would be happy about it. I think that it's time to move into new directions and not go back into the past if you're the New York Giants. But we'll see. I just really hope that Brian Dable steps up to the plate this year, because I like him, and I think that there are a lot of pros to what he brings. But yeah, it's starting to get a little bit concerning how so many bad stories come up, and of course the losing. So yeah, we'll see on Brian Dable.
Yeah, I tend to like Brian Dable as well, and think that there's some things you could take away from his second season and hopefully learn from. Like, I like that. It's clear he has a ton of passion, but I think sometimes gets a little over the top on the sideline, like when he gets caught on cameras, some of his interactions with the guys. And I'm sure behind the scenes, there's some questionable things, but just with the Belichick thought to close out here, like it's it seems like he's talked about that Giants job forever. Like that just seems like something that he would really, really want to do. Obviously, doesn't get hired this cycle. And I don't know if in 2025 I'm advocating for Bill Belichick to be like the plan to get the Giants back into, get back to the team that they want to be. But it just feels like something that ownership and Belichick would want and might be on their radar in a couple months.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel the same way. I think it's something that's going to be on the radar, but then you have to question, what does it mean for the front office? Is Joe Shane still going to be around? Is Belichick going to require front office, power? I don't know how it works out and how it shapes out, but I would assume that considering the Giants have this love for Belichick, they probably give him whatever he wants. But I'm just really hoping that it doesn't get to that situation, because I think that there is a severe domino effect that comes from hiring Bill Belichick in 2025. And I don't know if I really want to watch those dominoes fall.
There you go. Another one from Jeffrey in here says, can you guys explain why the Jets are constantly on the hot seat with coaches, but the Giants are able to hide the coaching dysfunction? I don't know if that's, you tell me if I'm off base here, but I don't think that's been the case as much recently, because it feels like the Giants have gone through this cycle where they're moving off of coaches like every 2 years or so for the last few at least.
Yeah, they've been churning through head coaches. We've had guys. Joe Judge was an absolute disaster. That was the worst situation imaginable. Pat Shurmur was a bad situation. The real problem with the Giants organization, this dysfunction, it's not the coaching staff, because that's been evident. Like, they've had a lot of problems on their coaching staff. I mean, even on their assistants, they've lost Wink Martindale this offseason. There was so much controversy around Mike Kafka. So there's been plenty of coaching dysfunction, but there hasn't been enough public front office dysfunction. Like Dave Gettleman, everybody knew he was the worst general manager in the NFL, but somehow he held on to that job for almost 6 years or 4 years, 5 years, whatever it was. That's really where the dysfunction lies in this Giants team, is that behind the scenes ownership and the front office, they're very good at keeping certain things private, and they're very good at stringing a guy along for a very long time, which then gets trickled down into the player personnel. So not only did they pull Dave Gettleman's dead weight along for all those years, as a result, we've been pulling Daniel Jones along for all these years, and now we're going into year 6 hoping for him to have a breakout. That's really where the dysfunction lies for me. I mean, I think that the coaching dysfunction has been very public and evident, but again, it's the front office that's really the sneaky problem for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Gettleman had a very long leash with the Giants and not deserve. He hired 2 coaches, didn't he?
Yeah.
Gettleman?
He hired Shurmur and Joe Judge.
Yeah. Why would he? What did he do to deserve? And I'm sure you said this at the time too, but what did he do to deserve to get to hire a second coach? Why not move on from both those guys after 2019?
No idea. I don't even know what he did to get hired by the Giants in the first place. The whole hiring of Dave Gettleman, and this is what concerns me with this Bill Belichick possibility, it was them hiring a friend of theirs from years ago, which is exactly what Bill Belichick would be. And I get that it's different. Bill Belichick, a lot more pedigree there. I mean, best head coach in NFL history, but the hiring was essentially, we liked this guy many years ago when he was in our building, so we're going to bring him back. And falling back into that old ways for the Giants is kind of what they've been trapped doing these past few years. So we really do need Joe Shane and Brian Daboll to pan out so that this team can finally go in this new direction and not keep falling back into the past.
No, absolutely. And let's get back to the Jets for a second here. We talked a little bit about it in the first segment, but one thing that Robert Saleh did earlier today was share his confidence in the offensive staff. And at the beginning of the show, that's kind of something that we were talking about, where we don't know how much we necessarily agree with that or not, but where I guess we could take this conversation, which is another area that Saleh mentioned that they would add to this quarterback room, and was very non-committal on Zach Wilson being here, which I don't expect him to be here in 2024. If the Jets go the draft route, let's say, and not in the first round, but maybe they take a mid-round swing on a Spencer Rattler, Michael Pratt, Jordan Travis, a name like that, should we be concerned about these guys getting their hands on a young quarterback like that? Or is it a little bit different because you have Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor in the building?
I think it's a little bit different. I think that you want one of those developmental guys in the back end of this roster. I think that it's necessary to add extra depth, especially considering Tyrod Taylor's injury history. I read today, Zach Wilson, there's trade offers on the table, but they're just waiting for a better one. So he's definitely gone. But what else are they going to do in that quarterback room? Because they probably need 3 quarterbacks, knowing Rodgers is coming off of that injury. Tyrod Taylor gets injured pretty much every single season when he plays. So who's that third quarterback on the roster? You probably need to have one. And I think that it would benefit the Jets to have not another veteran, but a young guy that they can get in there, develop. And, if things do pan out with this coaching staff, great. He continues to stay in that system and continues to develop. If not, he's only a late round pick anyway. You don't burn too much capital on him or anything too valuable on him, but you do get in a guy who I think needs to have some developmental upside. I think that's really necessary for the Jets and should be one of their priorities in the later rounds of the NFL draft.
Absolutely. Armani chimes in with the super sticker. Thank you so much, Armani, for your supporting the channel and the live show as we get rocking and rolling here on Big Apple Blitz. On that conversation with adding a quarterback, somewhere in the mid rounds, I think it makes a ton of sense for a few reasons. As you said, you have someone who could sit and develop behind Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. Taylor has injury concern, as well as Aaron Rodgers coming off of an injury. So having a third guy in here who could potentially develop and play seems like a necessity. But to me, there's no risk, and the reward is, potentially exponential. Maybe you find your Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Brock Purdy, who ends up being a starting quarterback for you. But even if your mid-round quarterback could develop into a backup quarterback / spot starter, it kind of sets up with the Jets timeline, because you have, Tyrod here for the next 2 years under contract. In my opinion, I think Rodgers plays another 2 years in 24 and 2025. And then the Jets are probably then looking to pivot and get a young quarterback in here. So let's say they go into the 2026 NFL draft looking to get that next quarterback. You already have that young guy on the roster who could either be your spot starter early on or help that young quarterback get acclimated to the NFL that way. So I really, like I said, I don't really see a downside in taking a swing at a mid-round quarterback.
The only downside potentially would be, foregoing the opportunity to address a different position of need, maybe. But again, we've kind of talked about it. This Jets roster doesn't have a whole lot of needs. I mean, yeah, you need to add depth across the board, but the starting lineup is solid. So taking some guys who you can develop in those middle rounds, that's really what the Jets need. And kind of the way that you laid it out there, having somebody who can develop into a spot starter, that's really important and it has a lot of value. I mean, listen, when you're taking those swings in the late rounds on quarterbacks, obviously the hope and prayer is that they develop and become the franchise quarterback one day, but that's not the likely outcome. The likely outcome is that they turn into a solid backup for you. And there's a lot of value to have in a career backup who's been on one team for a very long time, knows the system, knows the culture, can really just be a culture piece for you long term. I think that's really what the Jets need to find there with that mid to late round quarterback prospect. And again, just because of the uncertainty around both Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor, I think adding a quarterback is very necessary.
Plus, I'm going to try to do a positive spin zone for us here. The Jets have taken a million swings in the first round trying to fix this thing. Maybe now it's that mid-round swing that is actually going to fix the Jets. Am I coping, or is that a real possibility here?
I would say you're coping. This draft class, not crazy about a lot of the talent in the middle rounds at that quarterback spot. And again, you mentioned Jordan Travis, who I got to shout out because Palm Beach Gardens native. He played high school ball 5 minutes from my house. So love him. Hope he succeeds in the NFL. But again, for the Giants and for the Jets, teams with injuries at quarterback, him coming off of that gruesome leg injury, probably not the guy that these teams target in those middle rounds. I would think it would have to be a Pratt or somebody else along those lines who's healthier. But who knows, man? Maybe, this is the year that it happens. You take the swing in the late rounds and you find your Dak Prescott or, insert other example of late round quarterback developing. It's totally possible. But, I think that it's easier said than done.
It's definitely easier said than done. Kuka Lake chimes in and says, let's find that next Eric Ainge. So if you don't know who Eric Ainge is, which is highly unlikely as a Giants fan, 5th round pick from the Jets in 2008. I don't think he did not play a game in the NFL. So hopefully they do a little bit better than Eric Ainge or maybe a little bit more recognizable name, but Christian Hackenberg, second round swing, who did not take an NFL snap.
Yeah, not the best pick there for sure.
Definitely not. Let's close out with last Giants topic. Apparently in on a wide receiver on the pro market. I put Brandon Ayuk on the graphic because he was mentioned in a article over on Empire Sports. So what's the play here?
Yeah, the idea here is that the Giants are adamant that they want to add wide receiver talent before the NFL season. But because of the uncertainty at quarterback, there's speculation, okay, are they going to draft one? Are they going to draft a wide receiver at the top? While it seems very likely that they just stick and pick at 6 and they take the best wide receiver on the board, whether it be Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors or Modunze, it's also possible that they do make that move to go ahead and get a quarterback. So then what do they do at wide receiver? Because I don't think that we could feel comfortable going into 2024 with Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, and Wan'Dale Robinson being our receiving core. Those are all good guys. I like all of those players. Like Wan'Dale is a great route runner from the slot. Slayton's a great field stretcher on the outside for 700 yards a season. Like he's great at that. And of course, Jalen Hyatt, of course, being your big play threat. But how much can those guys really develop? What can they really do for you long term? I'm not so sure. The Giants need an alpha dog in that wide receiver core. And I think that Brandon Ayuk makes a lot of sense because the 49ers probably moving on from one of those wide receivers, don't want to pay both of them, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. But when would you make that trade for an Ayuk? In my opinion, I think it's probably a training camp deal. I think that the Giants could wait that long to find their wide receiver one. And then in doing so, they don't have to sacrifice draft capital from this year's draft. The Giants only have 6 picks, so trading away one of those picks to get a Brandon Ayuk, it's not ideal. They need more depth. They need more young talents and rookie contracts in this team. So they have to keep those picks, maybe even trade down at some point to add more picks. But if you wait until training camp to try and make that deal, you could send a 2025 second-round pick or something of the sorts. Maybe that's how you bring in a Brandon Ayuk or some other alpha dog wide receiver to hopefully fix this offense. And then if you combine that with the fact that you probably do land a quarterback in the first round of this year's draft in this scenario, then you've got a quarterback of the future. You've got a top-tier wide receiver. The Giants can actually go into 2024 in the regular season and feel like they might win some serious games this year.
Yeah, that was going to be my question for you. You kind of answered it with saying that could be a move that they make around training camp. Would you consider a trade back option in the draft? Because you'd be going a long way, but some sort of pick swap, whatever else to make it work, and Ayuk going the other way. Is that something you would consider, or you would rather stay put, get your pick in the top 10, and then maybe try to find a receiver after that in training camp, and then you're giving up 2025 capital?
Yeah, I'd rather give up the 2025 capital because, again, if I'm Joe Schoen, I don't know if I have that job in 2025. So I'm going to mortgage a little bit of the future to try and win right now, stay off the hot seat in 2024. So that's how I see it. But at the same time, with this wide receiver situation, this quarterback situation, it's paramount that the Giants find the quarterback to prevent Daniel Jones from getting on the field, as we mentioned earlier, with that injury guarantee. So they've got to find their quarterback in the first round. And it's going to probably cost them a pretty penny to trade up the 2 spots that they need to go to get that QB, but it's necessary. And then I think that in that scenario, you would rather give up some future capital and bring in a wide receiver around training camp instead. But it's also possible that a draft night trade happens. I believe that's what happened with A.J. Brown a couple of years ago when he was traded from Tennessee to Philadelphia. It happened during the night of the draft. So maybe we do see a situation like that with Brandon Ayuk, and that could unfold. Maybe the Giants give up their second-round pick and they get Brandon Ayuk, but I just think with the lack of draft capital that the Giants have, if they're going to be trading it, it's got to be to go ahead and get that quarterback. And then you're going to have to mortgage some of that future capital if you want to find that wide receiver on the trade market.
Now you're discussing the lack of draft capital. And there was a tweet from Jordan Renan that the Giants listed the Giants as a potential team to move back in the NFL draft. I took that and ran with wanting the Jets to trade up with the New York Giants. But is that something that you would seriously consider, moving back to pick up more assets in this year's draft class?
Yes, I would definitely consider it, but it depends on who's on the board at 6, because the way that I feel about it is in 2021, the Giants made this decision to trade down from pick, what was that, 11, I think they had, something of the sorts. Yeah, pick 11 with the Chicago Bears. Bears move up, get Justin Fields. If you look at that trade now, all across the board, everybody lost. The Giants moved down. They got Kadarius Toney. He was off the team in 2 years. Of course, we know Justin Fields didn't pan out with the Bears. But the unwritten part of that story, or the unfocused on part of that story, is the fact that the Giants had Micah Parsons right there on the board to fill a major need for them, and they got cute and they traded down for extra draft capital in the future, and they missed on all those picks. So kind of subscribing now to the belief where if you've got a blue chip prospect on the board, you just take the blue chip prospect and you don't overthink it. So for the Giants picking at 6, Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the board, Malik Neighbors, those guys are blue chip. I'm not trading down if I have the ability to land one of those two guys. But if they're both taken and it's Rome Odunze versus a big haul of draft capital, then I'd start to debate that. I think that, Odunze may be in that same tier, maybe not, and I think that's debatable. But I think that there is a world where the Giants decide, okay, we can get a first-round pick this year, we can get second-round pick this year, and add a whole bunch of capital. A lot of needs to fill on this Giants team still. They got a lot of work done during free agency, but there's still a lot of work to do on this roster. So, yeah, if there's no blue-chip prospect on the board in the mind of Joe Schoen, I think that trading down makes a lot of sense for this team.
Yeah, I think there will be, though, because like how you list it, if you want to take one of Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors, if you assume that the 4 quarterbacks go first and then one of those wide receivers are going to be there, or then if not, if there's a scenario where both of the receivers go in the top 5, then one of the quarterbacks is going to be there, and I would think you just take the quarterback then. So as much as I would, like, if I'm the Giants, I don't think I would want to trade back from that spot, because you're either getting a quarterback or you're getting one of the 2 top receivers. So I personally would just stick in pick, but from the Jets fans side of things, they have a ton of different options that they could do in the NFL draft. If a team in whatever scenario, like the Giants, for instance, if they actually did want to move back and the price wasn't outlandish, it would be something that I would consider to move up to get a Neighbors or a Joe Alt or something like that. So from the Giants side, I don't really see it. I think if I'm them, I would rather just either take the quarterback, probably JJ McCarthy at 6, or take one of the 2 receivers. To me, I think that would go a long way, rather than dropping back. You move back 4 spots, and then who are you taking at 10? Then
I guess then it becomes a conversation of Brock Bowers, but
yeah,
that doesn't really fill the Giants' needs in the way that a top wide receiver would.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think, again, from the Jets side, I would like to see them move back, because I think that would only help the Jets. But on the Giants side, I don't really think it makes a whole lot of sense for them.
Yeah, it's, again, to me, it's the same thing as when Micah Parsons was on the board. Blue chip prospect, should have never traded out of that spot, should have just taken him. They're going to feel the same way if they trade down and there's a Malik Neighbors on the board and he goes elsewhere and becomes a star. So especially considering how big of a need wide receiver is for this team, if you've got that blue chip prospect on the board, you got to take it. But again, I'm just hoping that this never becomes a situation that the Giants have to ponder. I want them to just trade up and get their quarterback. But again, easier said than done. Takes 2 to tango. I don't know if it's just talk from the Patriots or if they really are considering moving down. The Cardinals, how far are they willing to move down? How much are the Vikings willing to give up? There are a lot of moving pieces right now, so it's going to be easier to say than to do for the Giants in terms of trading up, but that's got to be the priority for me, trading up, getting a quarterback so you can get Daniel Jones's bum ass off of the field in 2024.
I like the way you think. Before we get out of here, just wanted to get quick thoughts on some news that came out right before we started recording and going live here for the show. NFL banning the hip drop tackle. Just how do you think that impacts the 2024 season in the NFL?
I just think it makes it harder for officials to officiate the game. And I know we'll hear a lot of conversation, and I know you were even saying this, Matt, that it makes things really difficult for defenders. But I think that there was a lot of criticism handed out to officials last year. The referees maybe didn't do the best job in 2023. Now it's even harder for them to do that job in 2024. They have more controversial calls to make now with this hip drop thing. So how do you police it? How do you define what exactly does that tackle look like? Is it this? Is it that? And now you're going to have calls that maybe should be made or maybe shouldn't be made. It's going to be just really difficult and a headache for the officials. And ultimately it's going to probably bog down the product and create a more complicated game for the NFL. And they're going to be playing games with referees now. And I don't think that it should have gone through this rule.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like it's going to be an absolute disaster the first time that this judgment call, because that's what it is. It's a judgment call, impacts like the end of a game, right? Like a win or a loss for one of these teams. It's going to happen. That is something that's going to happen. But I just think it's incredibly hard already to play defense in this league, and they're only making it harder. Now, I get player safety, like taking out the headshots. Agree. Why don't you take out, instead diving right at guys' knees and taking out, ACLs? Like that to me is a
Right.
bigger deal than the hip drop, which it seems like every single reaction online from players is like, what are we like? How are we supposed to play defense now? The answer is they can.
Yeah, I don't know if the NFLPA was consulted on this one. I'm not sure about that, but it feels like they weren't because it seems like all of the players have been vocally against this for quite some time.
Yeah. So we'll see how it impacts in 2024, but just wanted to hit on that quickly before we get out of here. Any closing thoughts as we head into another week in the offseason?
No closing thoughts really, but there was another rule that popped up while we were doing this show, and I wanted to get your take on the new
Sure.
challenge rule if you had an opinion on that one.
Okay. So what is this new challenge rule? I have not
I'll have
seen
to
that.
find and pull it up. 1 second here. I got to find that. But essentially, they're making a change to how many challenges a team has. So, okay, here it is. The NFL has approved giving a team a third challenge if they get one of their first two correct. It used to be that you must get both correct to earn a third challenge, but now getting one out of two correct grants you an additional challenge. I feel like that could have some pretty big impacts on high intensity games late in the season, really close calls. I'm not sure, if you have a different take, but I think that's an interesting one.
Yeah. I don't mind it. I think, it's necessary probably because too often times we see, challenges becoming a major impact on it because of just how poor, unfortunately, a lot of the refereeing is in this sport. So sometimes we see coaches like not throw the challenge flag early on in the game because they're worried about losing their challenges. So if now you change it, if there's a questionable one early, you're more willing to throw it because you have that second chance where if I hit this, if I hit on the second one, I'll get that third challenge regardless. So I don't mind it. I think that's a wise one to add.
Yeah, I think that it should promote more coaching challenges, which is exciting. But I do think that the next necessary step here for the challenge flag is to open up what can be challenged and start having some of those calls, those judgment calls, like you mentioned, challengeable. I mean, some of those PIs or roughing the passers, different things. I think that's the next step for the NFL in terms of what the challenge flag can be used for and how it impacts the game. But it seems like we're still a bit away from having the challenge flag expand in that way.
Yeah, I would love that because, unfortunately, over the last, think of two examples that cost Jets games on questionable decisions. The Kansas City game last year with pass interference negating an interception on Mahomes, and then against the Patriots 2 years ago, you had a Michael Carter pick six called back on a questionable roughing the passer that completely changed the game. So, I would love for those to you'd be able to challenge it. Like, I don't know. I don't want the game to be 5 hours long, but at the same time, like some of those really big judgment calls, I think they should be challengeable.
I agree. Or they need to add some sort of, if you watch European football, if you watch soccer, a VAR, video assistant referee, somebody who's overseeing those judgment calls in the box and kind of calling into the refs on the sideline and saying, hey, pick up that flag, or, it's not offsides in terms of it being in European football. So I think something like that, there just needs to be some sort of change here, especially now that you're throwing in the hip drop tackle and all this other stuff. It makes it harder for the officials, was my main point on the hip drop tackle. So there needs to be some sort of safety net for them, whether that be coaches challenges or video assistant referee. I do think there is a change needed.
Yeah, Fear as Grim says before we get out of here, but running backs will enjoy not worrying about the hip drop tackle now, which opens the door for running backs making a comeback. So I'll set the over under Brees Hall 2,000 yards rushing next year.
I'm gonna smash the under on that one.
Yeah, of course, but that is true. It is going to be more challenging again for defenses here. So
Yeah.
I would imagine running backs are impacted positively here.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting takeaway, though, that maybe the running backs can have a little bit of a renaissance season here. Maybe Saquon Barkley goes and actually proves to be worth that $12 million per year now with the Eagles. It's totally possible that this has a lot of benefits for the runners, and yeah, that'll be an interesting takeaway that we'll reassess during the season.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for us on this episode. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Give a like before you get out of here. Make sure to check out Anthony's content on his channel and Fireside Giants. Me, for my Jet stuff, head over to Matt O'Leary NY and also Talking Jets, where we're doing shows over there. We'll be back on Thursday with more Big Apple Blitz. We'll catch you next time.